Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Livin The Dream video podcast. My name is Rishi Barran with the Dan Patrick School of Sportscasting. This is episode number 30. We'll call it the Billy Owens edition. I think Brandon might know who that is, even though it was maybe a little before his time. But I'm here with Brandon Daniels. He works at Sushi Grade Media. Just a handful of months ago, he got a promotion to be a field creator. He's traveling all over the country, and we'll talk about some of the really cool places he's got to visit. But Brandon, I know how busy you are. Thank you for making some time for us today.
Yeah, thanks so much, Rishi. I'm excited to do this for sure.
Brandon, you have literally traveled around the world in your life. You have a very unique background that has had many stops and many different ways of thought. But we're really happy that you came to Full Sail University. You, as I was just sharing off the air a minute ago, you are kind of the quintessential graduate that we want to have. Someone who comes and represents our school well, who has a great attitude, who's a hard worker, and does all the right things in addition to be extremely talented. But before you got to all that, you had to start somewhere. So where did the dream begin for you?
Well, it's interesting. I feel like, thinking about that question in terms of, I want to be a sportscaster, I want to be in sports broadcasting was such a later in life decision for me. But I think there were so many elements along the way that really, if you think back on it, well, I kind of always wanted to do it. When I was 14 or 15, I was so much into the documentaries and the films that Golf Channel would put out because I was really into golf and I played golf. I was really into the documentaries that they do on the US Open and on the Masters and on the British Open Championship. And so for me, those are the first memories that I remember being interested in. Wow, I want to do something like that. But I was a lifelong sports fan. I grew up going to Madison Square Garden with my dad, since we were right outside of New York. So sports was always in my life. But I think my dream to be in sports broadcasting came a little later. But I think the elements are always still there. That's for sure.
Well, we can get more into the shift in really going after it in a minute, but let's start with when you were young. What was it about the documentaries that you would see on Golf Channel and elsewhere that made you feel really good about the production and storytelling side of things?
I don't, it just kept drawing me in. I'd see them on TV when I was much younger, and I'd watch them. My dad would watch them, and I'd be interested in them. But as I got older, I started to hear the way that they would tell the stories, and I was so intrigued by the history and by the moments because I watched the broadcast. I watched Jordan Spieth hit this putt, and I watched Phil Mickelson or Tiger Woods hit these shots. But hearing the way that the stories were told, the way each piece was crafted out to make this idea and this moment that stuck with me was just kept me very interested. And so when I was 14, 15, I was sitting in my room watching these over and over and over. And I have these memories burned into my mind where I watched Spieth hit the putt at Chambers Bay for the US Open. And I watched Phil battle with Henrik Stenson at the Open Championship in 2016. And I just remember these things because those stories that were told, the way that they were produced and told, stuck with me so much. I was so obsessed with them that I was like, there's got to be some way in my life that I want to be a part of that process because it blows my mind the way that they're able to put that together.
You shared being really a lifelong golfer. I know tennis is also a sport you've always been interested in growing up in Connecticut. How did you dive into those two sports in particular when you were young?
I mean, it was all my dad. My dad was obsessed with basketball. He's a Syracuse basketball fan since he was a kid. So, the first shirt that I ever wore when I was born was a Syracuse basketball shirt. So that's been ingrained in my mind since, pretty much since I was born. So I was always a basketball fan. I always played basketball because of my dad. And the same thing with tennis. There was always something on the TV when I came home. We didn't watch the 6 o'clock news. We watched the 6 p.m. Sports Center to get into whichever Big East basketball game there was or whatever primetime tennis match there was or whatever broadcast of golf that they had on replay. There was always some sort of sport on, and we always did the Around the Horn PTI Sports Center trio since I was super young. So my dad, that was instilled in our family that we're all watching those shows and we're all watching sports. So it's always been a part of my life because it was always on.
Who were some of the athletes you were drawn to at an early age?
I loved I loved Rafael Nadal. I think as a player, that was one of the first players I remember being interested in and like obsessed with. Same goes for Peyton Manning, and that's how I grew into a Colts fan. Which a lot of people ask me, well, how are you a Syracuse basketball fan and an Indianapolis Colts fan? It doesn't make any sense. And Peyton Manning was the athlete that got me into the Indianapolis Colts. So him and Rafael Nadal in tennis were the two guys that, when I was 5, 6 years old, just watching them, I was always glued to how much Rafa fought and how much he clawed through matches, and just how Peyton was just this talent that I had never seen before. I was so young that I didn't really understand too much about it, but I saw this guy just go ahead and just light up the New York Giants one time. There was a Manning Bowl that I watched when I was super young. My whole family, my whole extended family, they're all Giants fans. But for me, I was drawn to the other side of the field. So Peyton was always a guy that I watched, and obviously Rafa as well.
It's got to be cool that, your young years, your childhood was filled with some of the greatest athletes ever, Peyton
Mm-hmm.
certainly being one of them, and getting to see their greatness not only on the field but also the process they went through. And I know process is an important thing for you in your life now, but you shared that your dad was an instrumental figure for you in getting you into sports. What was life like with your dad, when you spent time with him during these events and other things?
Well, it was, it's the one thing that whatever happens, I know that my dad and I can talk sports and we can chop it up about whatever. We still do it. He lives overseas now, but I still, talk to him about whatever's going on in sports. He was my tennis coach. He was my basketball coach. He was the guy that I went to every single game with, every live game with. He brought me to all of my personal basketball games and my tennis matches. So he and I were just this pairing in sports because that's all we did together. We played tennis together. He coached me, and that was something we just always did. It was part of our life, and it's never going to go away, no matter how old he gets or whatever happens. Sports is always going to be a part of our lives together because we were doing it in so many different ways since I was born. So,
And I appreciate him getting you into Syracuse basketball. I
oh
am
yeah.
from the Syracuse area, so Brandon and I had an instant bonding with that, and we shared some stories. Forget, you showed me a picture of some random player, and you're like, "Do you know who this is?" And I knew who it was.
My dad loved that story because I was telling him, hey, it was my first day in the studio and I was sitting on prompter. I was wearing my high school tennis jacket. You asked me about that first because I knew you knew some stuff about community school. But we started talking about Syracuse basketball, and then over the next few months, I told my dad about it. He's like, well, we got to see how much this guy Rishi knows about Syracuse basketball and about Big East basketball. So he'd send me pictures. Well, let's see if he knows this guy and this guy. And you were pretty spot on with it. So it's funny that was such an easy connection for the two of us because it's both big part of our lives. So
Yeah, you were wearing that Community School of Naples pullover, and I did
mhm.
live in that TV market for the longest that I ever worked in any TV market, 5 or 6 years there. And for you, it was a transition too. You had to go from Connecticut to Naples, and I know you were well, you're a teenager, right, when you made that move?
Mhm. I
So
think I
I'm
was 12. Yeah.
so I'm sure that was a transition. There are worse things to ask a young man to do than to move to Florida from snowy Connecticut. But how did that influence your life having to make that change at that age?
It was a big change for my family just because my dad was switching jobs. He was getting into teaching for the first time when we moved down to Florida. So for him, it was the biggest change. And for me, going right around that middle school time, I was always really open to change, and I think that helped me a lot down the line with the amount of change that I've gone through. But I was always really open to change, and my dad sat me down. It's like, "Hey, we're moving to Florida." I'm like, "All right, we'll move to Florida and see what happens." But I think being so open to change back then, because I don't even remember being upset about it. I had a lot of close friends. We had, it was my first 12 years of my life was in Connecticut, but I was just like, all right, what's next? Let's go do it.
Well, I tell you what, there's worse places to live than Naples if you're a golf and
Yeah.
tennis fan. Once you got there and having all these top flight golf courses and certainly some great tennis facilities as well, how did you adapt to that opportunity?
Well, that was great. I played mostly basketball when I was in Connecticut. It's funny. I think the weather of the places that I was at dictated the sport I played the most. I played the most basketball in Connecticut, and when I got to Florida, the tennis and the golf thing, because there was so much of it, was just such an easy way for me to just go play. And I'd always loved playing tennis. So we'd go everywhere from around the corner to half an hour away, played on my school's teams through middle school and high school. And the same thing with golf. Golf to me was always a summer thing until I got down to Florida and I realized, oh, wait, I could play this 12 months out of the year. This is pretty cool. So I used to go, with my dad every Sunday that I get him to go. And we'd go out and play nine, we play 18. So golf really took off for me when I moved down to Florida, even though it was always part of my life. But tennis and golf, being able to play that 12 months out of the year was amazing.
I had to ask you this as a basketball guy too. I remember once going to community school for a playoff game for the boys basketball team. And I look up there's kind of like a private area above the court. And sitting there was one Larry Bird, who I
Yeah.
heard was friends with somebody high up there. Did you ever run into Larry Bird at community school?
So I remember seeing him in that exact little like rounded triangular awning thing that you're talking about because I know that pretty specifically. But I never met him, which kind of sucks because he was a Celtic. But I knew he was there. I saw him a few times. The first time I remember seeing him was before I even started at school, at community school. And it was, I went to the gym and it's now named after Mo Kent, who was a big factor in that school. But I went to the gym not to see community school basketball, but to see Florida Gulf Coast play a summer scrimmage there. They had a blue versus green scrimmage and they played it at our gym. And I was sitting there watching because my dad was super interested in watching the FGCU guys. And this was right around the 2012, 2013 time, which for anybody who knows college basketball knows that was a pretty cool time for Gulf Coast. And I remember looking up and my dad's like, who is that? Who is that? I'm like, I think that's Larry Bird, Dad. I think that's Larry Bird. And it was really cool because I'm like, I'm here in Southwest Florida. I had never heard of Naples before I, moved down there. And I'm sitting in this gym and I look up and there's Larry Bird sitting there. And I was like, this is the coolest thing ever. As a basketball fan, it's pretty cool.
I remember trying to like interview him after that, and I'm sure he wouldn't have talked to me, but I was gonna try. And so I
Gotta
was
try.
like, I was planning it as I was sitting there and shooting. I'm like, oh, how do I get Larry after? And so I tried to find him on his way out, and he knew his way out of there. I'm sure
Of course
he's
he
an
did. Of
expert at finding his secrets
course
in
he
and out,
did.
so he doesn't get bothered. But I did have a great perspective of community school. It seemed like an excellent place to get a really good education based on my experiences. Your experiences were much more in depth than mine. What did you learn at community school?
I mean, it was super cool for me because both my parents taught there. My sister obviously was going there as well. So it was the four of us taking on this new challenge. And that was a period of time. I look back on it now as the time that I think I wasted the most because back then I was not really much of a hard worker. I wasn't really dedicated and all too much. I was smart in school, but I never tried enough to get good grades. And so I'd place in, when you test at the end of the year, I'd place into APs and I'd place into honors and then I'd fail them. So I'd move back. It was just this back and forth roller coaster that I'd go through that my mom would have to hear about from her colleagues. And she'd be like, Brandon, what are you doing this time? What are you doing this year? And so at community school, looking back on it now is the time that I wasted the most, but it's funny to think back on it now how much I've changed and how much opportunity there was at the time because of all the resources that were there. Being in Florida, if I wanted to be an athlete, I could have really tried. I don't think it would have happened. I was never the best tennis player ever, but and then as a student, it was the same way where I think, community school in general and Naples in general was a really great opportunity. I just didn't personally take its full potential, but looking back on it now, I'm glad that I was there because it taught me a lot of things in my next couple of stops.
So what changed for you? Because it's interesting to me to hear you say that because you were such a hard worker and so all in at our school. And to be honest with you, you're not the first person that's been on this podcast that's had a similar story that I was like, really, you? So what changed?
Well, it was my next couple of stops where I realized that I really had to kick things into high gear. So my parents made the decision after 5 years that we're done with Naples. I'm like, well, I don't see anything wrong with it. Like, I'm just kind of going through. I had just finished my sophomore year of high school. I was on the tennis team. I've been playing varsity since I was in eighth grade. So I was kind of steadily moving up. So for me, as somebody who wasn't really much of a student, varsity tennis was the thing that I wanted to, stick around for. So, I moved up from eighth grade. I was kind of, end of the roster guy. Then freshman year, I was middle of the pack. And then sophomore year, I was knocking on the door of the top eight. And so I'm like, well, I got 2 years to grow on this, and maybe I could, look up at the guys that I've been looking at for 3 years and maybe be able to take their spot. And I was like, man, what are we doing here? Like, where are we going? And my mom said, we're moving to China. I was like, what do you mean? What do you mean? Like China, like China. I was like, okay. I was like, sure, we'll go. But I was really confused, and I was like, but we're gonna do it anyway. And my mom's one thing to me before we left, she's like, we're going to move to China. You can do whatever you want. The one thing I'm going to make you do is I'm going to make you play music again. The one thing that I did throughout my whole life was play classical music. And I had done it from when I was 3 to when I was 15. And I finally gave up on it in this whole little roller coaster of Naples, Florida. One of the things that I gave up on was playing music. I didn't want to practice. I had been doing it for so long. I didn't enjoy it. And I said to my mom, finally, after years, I was like, I don't want to do this anymore. And she let me quit. It was right before I started high school, but she said, we're going to move to China, but you have to play music again. And I said, all right, let's do it. Like, well, I will abide by your wishes. We'll go. And because I was getting back into music, and it was so much of a harder program in high school for me to have to go through as a student, I had to be like, all right, well, I have to really try at this now. I can't just coast through this, or else it's not going to go well. So I really started to think like, all right, let's kick this into high gear a little bit.
What kind of music did you play? What type of instrument?
So I was a pianist first. So I played piano from 3 to 15. That was my main instrument. And I played that in competition, and I played it through festivals and concerts. And that was what I did all the time, pretty much. And I picked up clarinet in fourth grade and played that through sixth grade, and stopped doing that as well. But classical music was always part of my life. And going to high school, it was like, I'm kind of sick of it. I'm kind of done with it. But going to China and getting back into music, I found, a little bit more enjoyment out of it. And it really taught me to be focused, to be organized, and to put hard work into things, because good things are going to come out of hard work.
Would you call that the changing point in your life in terms of your attitude toward work?
Yeah, I think I realized my junior year, hadn't played clarinet in 5 or 6 years, and I picked it up, and within 3 months, my teacher was like, are you trying to do this for a living, or like, what's going on? And I was like, no, I haven't played in 5 years. My mom is making me do it. And she said, look, I don't know what you want to do in your life, but I'll tell you firsthand that if you want to actually do this, I can get you to play college music, to play music in college, and maybe you get a scholarship, who knows? But like, you have a lot of talent, you got to do something with this. And I said, okay, I'll do it. And I spent the next year and a half or 2 years really working really hard to be able to get that. And because for me, that was like the first time that somebody told me, and I realized that somebody told me, hey, you're really good at this, you have a future in this. And for me, that was like, oh wow, like somebody thinks I can do something at a high level, let me go out and really work at it. And so that kicked me into another level where I was like, all right, I'm going to do this, I'm going to be a musician, this is all I want to do, I'm really good at this, I want to do this. And it was everything that I wanted to do for the next 2 years.
We're talking to Brandon Daniels. He's a field creator at Sushi Grade Media. He's all over the world, but he's also local to us in the Orlando area. Brandon, I think that's a great story to tell, and for a number of reasons, but one was that encouragement that you got. We learn at Full Sail as instructors how important it is to share positive reinforcement at the right times, because you never know when one thing can really change a life. It sounds like that happened for you. And I do want to touch on the music and how that relates to what you do now, because I like to share, and you may even remember me doing this in class, the process of editing and the process of storytelling often has a mathematical beat to it, much like music. It's got ebbs and flows. You got to hit the beats at certain points. That musical background, how does that help you now with your job?
It's a huge part of my job, and I didn't think it was ever going to be. when I stopped playing music for the second time, I said to myself, I'm never doing this again. I had a good experience this time. I'm going to leave it at a positive, but I don't want to do this anymore. And it is still a huge part of my life, which is hilarious because of how much I fought it away. It's still coming back with me every time. Every time I jump in the edit bay, everything has a beat. Every single piece that I cut, every single piece that I produce has a beat to it. Obviously, the backing of it is a piece of music that you put in the back of whatever piece you're doing for what I do. And I am so fine tuned to the metronome of a piece, of a story, or of a feature that it is constantly burned in my brain. So much so that I can hear every little mistake that, say, an editor. The first time this happened to me was 2 years ago. I was working for the same job I'm working now, and I was working with an editor who had 10 plus years of experience. He worked at Golf Channel, and we were sitting down and I cut this little 90-second piece to go into one of our 2 hour docs that we were doing. And we were going through it. It was the first time I really cut anything of length with edits and everything for the company at that level, at a network level. So he wanted to see how I was doing. And he said, wow, your music editing is really good. How'd you do that? I was like, well, I played music for 15 years. This is all I did. So, and he asked me to break down my process of how I went through music editing because it was so smooth. In a 90-second cut, I think I had 6 cuts of music. So I took a 4 minute, piece of music. I chopped it down to 90 seconds, and nobody had any idea that it wasn't a 90-second, song. And he's like, well, how'd you do that? And I said, well, the song's in 4/4 time. And if you just listen to that beat, it was, I was guessing there was around 95 beats per minute. So if it's at that beats per minute and it's at this time signature, I can just figure out where each cut's going to be because I know when the 1 of the beat is and the 4 of the beat is. And he just was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but sure, we're going to run with it. And it sticks with me every single day because I'm still obsessing over that part of what we do specifically. But that attention to detail and that understanding of how everything has a beat extends past just music, but it's been such a huge part of what we do. And I was so grateful to have that experience in my back pocket to kind of pull out.
You'll hear some people in our business say, I was never very good at math. That's why I went into broadcasting, kind of sarcastically. That's the perfect example of how important math and, as you noted, music is to what we do, because we're a visual and an audio entity, right? And being able to understand the math, and then especially in sports statistics as well, which is a different realm, but it's the same concept of why math is important. So you got back into music, but now you're in a whole different world in China. What was your life like living in Qingdao, China?
That to me still was one of the best years that I've had. It was such a world turned upside down moment when I first got there. We landed in Shanghai and it's hot and there's a million people, running around this airport. I don't really know what they're saying. I've been taking Chinese, but I still don't know. And we're all like, my family's like, what are we doing here? We finally got to where we were going the next day, and it started for me just this huge, it was this huge change in who I was to become a lot more independent and a lot more mature. One, just because of, I was in a big city of 9 million people, which to China is pretty mid-sized to small, but for me, it was pretty huge. Even being around New York when I was younger, but I took it as the opportunity for me to just be myself, be independent, and be mature. And that has done leaps and bounds for me because I just was able to kind of just go out and do whatever I wanted. And try this and try that and go out with my friends here and go out there. And finishing high school at the same time was really difficult, but it allowed me to really, from a work standpoint, become a lot more mature because I had to lock in a lot more because it was a lot tougher of a program. So there were so many different steps in those 3 years that matured me to who I am now. And so looking back on it is one of the best experiences that I've ever had.
I think you just described a number of attributes that people think of when they think of the Eastern culture, and more specifically in this case, the Chinese culture. But what were some of the other benefits for you to learn and grow in such a different place than what it's like in the United States?
Well, the first thing is that I had to adapt to not being able to speak the same language as high of a proficiency as I spoke English. So I had to problem solve and I had to be able to lean on people and be able to have to talk to people that I can't really speak to. And as somebody who's a producer now, a huge part of what I do now is about talking to people, solving problems, and communicating. In a general sense, being in China was what allowed me to be able to step into a producer role as quickly as I did, because the amount of problem solving that I had to do in 3 years as somebody who was 15, 16 years old when I first got there to when I was 18 when I left was it was at such a large scale because it was every day of my life that I just kind of had to figure it out. And so figuring it out has become a central part of who I am. And I'm not an overly positive person, but I'm definitely not a negative person. I'm gonna figure it out person. And that really started because of what I had to do while I was in China.
The school that you attended was called the Qingdao Amerasia International School in Qingdao. I apologize if I mispronounced any of those words as I said that, but from what I read about it, there's students from more than 25 different countries. You talked about the language barrier, even though there is English that is spoken there, and you were part of the International Baccalaureate IB diploma program there. Um, Blending with people from all those different countries, being in that type of a school, uh, how did you assimilate yourself beyond just finding your way to problem solve through the language barrier?
I think immediately I recognized that I was going to have to pretty much take out everything that I knew about the world, which is, funny to say that in such a grand sense. But in reality, I have to go to school with all these people who grew up so many different ways. Instead of just being true to who I am and saying, well, this is how I do things. And if somebody doesn't do what I do, I'm not going to mess with them. Instead, I was like, I want to learn about what everybody else does. So for me, it was such a eye-opening thing to hear everybody's, backgrounds and how they grew up. It was such a perspective thing for me that hearing how this person did this and this person did that, for me, it's like, well, that's actually a pretty cool way to think about things. I'm going to try to do that. And well, that's a pretty cool way to think about that. Let me try that. And so I just opened myself up to a wealth of perspective that I wouldn't have had anywhere else that stuck with me. It will stick with me for the rest of my life just because of the fact that I was around so many different types of people who all had different parents and different upbringings from different places. So now I have all of their, perspectives in my head when I can go about new things where, it's allowed me to be so much more open to new change and to new opportunities.
One thing I'm sure didn't change when you went there was you're still a big sports fan. What was
Mhm.
Brandon Daniels, the sports fan's life like in China?
I had a tough time watching sports. I did not watch nearly as much as I did when I was in the US. And the biggest thing that I couldn't watch was the NFL. I could not watch football like I could in the US. It just wasn't available. The only games that I really could watch were any sort of streams that were online that may or may not have been legal that was able to get around to. So I just, I didn't watch a ton of football, but there were just some moments that I remember watching football specifically. I remember watching the first football game I ever watched was I woke up at 1 o'clock in the morning to watch the first Colts game of the season, the first year that I got to China. And I woke up at 1 o'clock and I swiftly saw them get destroyed 46-9 in the first game of the season. It did not end up being a good season for the Colts, but that was the first game I remember watching of any sport in China. Not a great start. But the next year, I was able to get some of my friends from my school into football. And so I'm like, hey, let's watch the playoffs because the Colts had turned around their season in 2018. It was Andrew Luck's first year back after being injured in 2017. So for me, I wanted to watch my team be in the playoffs for the first time in a little while. So we all we watched the Colts beat the Texans in the playoffs at 1 o'clock, and then we watched the Cowboys play the Seahawks at 4:30, 5:30 in the morning. So it was an all night affair and an all early morning affair. And those were the moments that I always remember because it's so turned on its head from what we do normally, where you'd watch a 1 p.m. playoff game and a 4:30 Eastern playoff game. And now I'm watching it in the middle of the night. So it was difficult to watch sports, but I did get my fill sometimes, and I enjoyed the few times that I could.
Well, I'm sorry to hear you may have missed the Curtis Painter era. Was that what that was, that bad year? Can't
No,
remember.
that was the Jacoby Brissett, the first Jacoby Brissett
Oh, okay.
year. It started with Scott Tolzien, but it was
Oh
Jacoby
God.
Brissett year. So it was, yeah,
Okay,
those are some fun
Tolzien.
names.
Oh man, like trust me,
But
I know what it's like to play with the ever-changing quarterbacks. You've had a little
I'm
bit better
sure.
fortune with your team than I do. Do they what's the sports culture like in China? What do they watch? What do they do? What do they play?
Basketball obsessed people, and that was awesome to see because I didn't know what I was expecting, and I got to China, and NBA basketball was everywhere. Everybody was obsessed with Kobe and with LeBron. Obviously, they're obsessed with the top guys, but they loved NBA basketball, and I was like, yes, there's something that I can watch all the time. But I had been out of playing basketball since I was in middle school. I stopped playing when I was in middle school. It just wasn't really good enough at the time. And I remember I was like, well, I want to play a sport. I want to be invested in the biggest sport that China has to offer, which is basketball. So I'm like, Dad, I got to figure out a way to play on this school's basketball team because he was going to be the coach. And the last time I was trying to play basketball, he was the coach and he cut me. So I was like, Dad,
Oh wow.
I want to play basketball. I want to play basketball again. So what do I have to do here? Because this is sick. Like there's basketball courts everywhere. It's a coastal city. It's beautiful. It's insane. Everybody loves the sport. I want to be a part of it. I just want to play basketball. And he said, all right. It was the summertime. We went out. It was probably 92 degrees, and the sun was just beating down. I mean, we were playing outside. I'm like, why can't we go to the school's gym? He's like, we're doing this outside. Do you want to play on my team? You're gonna have to go through what I have for you. So we spent the next 3 hours doing conditioning drills, and then he said, "All right, you can play on the team." And I said, "Great." And it was a great couple of years playing basketball for the school, but just also being around so many people who loved basketball because it was such a huge part of my life with my dad and I always watching games together. So being around 9 million people who were obsessed with basketball was awesome because it was all that I talked about. That's when I really got into professional basketball because I wasn't a huge NBA guy before that, but I really got into it when I went to China. And so I watched it nonstop. I was able to go to some of the CBA games, the Chinese Basketball Association games, because there was a team in our city. And so that was cool to be able to see a different style of basketball and to see a couple names that I recognize at the same time. But they were such a basketball obsessed city, and I loved every minute of it.
I'm gonna bet their CBA is a lot different than our CBA, right?
A little bit, a little bit.
Well, in case you didn't guess, Brandon did not remain living in China for the rest of his life. He is back here in the United States, and he attended the Dan Patrick School of Sportscasting. Brandon, what brought you back to the U.S. and how'd you end up at Full Sail?
It was such a spur of the moment, lucky thing that happened that I was able to even find Full Sail because I had no idea that it existed before 2020. So I was still living in China in 2020, which was a big year for the world because of
Yeah, it
the
was, wasn't it?
the coronavirus that was going through everything, and I was in China when that started over there,
Oh my God.
and so I had no intention to leave the country until they told me I had to. And so this was June 2020. They said, we're canceling your visa. You're out on this day. There's going to be some real big problems if you're not out on this day. And I said, okay, I will do just that. So it was like June 4th. June 4th, I had my flight. I got to Florida on June 7th. It took 3 days to get there because of so many cancellations and delays. And it took me 3 days to get from China to, I flew into Miami. When I was laying over in LA, I finally got back to the US. I was like, man, I'm finally back. I got through all that. And I remember sitting and I was watching a YouTube video. I was watching some old basketball highlight just to pass the time. It was probably a Celtics game. I don't remember. And I was just sitting there watching, and this ad popped up on YouTube for the Dan Patrick School of Sportscasting. I was like, what? Like, I just skipped it. I was like, I don't need to hear about this. Like, I don't, my plan to go to college was not really anything. I was going to take a communications course at Lynn University online. That was my plan. But I was like, what is this fake school that I'm getting an ad for? And so I skipped it. And then I watched another video and it came up again. I was like, what is this? So I looked it up because I had 4 hours to kill, and I looked it up, and I was like, wait, this is kind of cool. I know Dan Patrick. I know all these guys. Wait, hold on. I know every single one of these guys that they have on here. And I sent it to my mom. I was like, Mom, look at this. Like, is this real? At first, I asked her if it was real, and she said it looks real to me. It's in Orlando, and I was like, well, can you do some digging on it while I'm on my flight, and we'll talk when I get to Florida. And she said, okay. And we called about it when I got to some family's house. And we called about it, and she's like, this is actually really cool. I think you should do this. And I said, yeah, I think so too. And I did some more digging and I did some more digging. And then the next day I applied and I got through it. I started the whole process. It was just a spur of the moment decision that got me there, but I had to take the opportunity because it looked so cool.
Well, you took it, and now I see a bunch of credentials up over one of your shoulders there. So I'm gonna guess that things worked out well enough.
Did
But
okay.
you alluded to it, right? You're in China at the start of the COVID outbreak. Now you're back in the
Mm.
United States, and you're starting school still in the midst of everything that was going on with that. What was that like for you to come to school and still have some of those restrictions in place?
Well, I weighed even going in the first place because it was August of 2020. The day after my birthday was supposed to be my first day. And I talked to my mom. I'm like, well, if I can't have classes online, what's the point? All I've been hearing about is how immersive these classes are and how I need to be on campus to make this worthwhile. And I was just like, well, I mean, I could take it online. Let's try it. I'll take it online. I think the way that they set it up, I thought it was still going to be super immersive. And I said, you know what, let's take it online. So I delayed it a month, and then I took the first month online and slowly started to work my way over to Orlando. So when I moved in there, I was technically a campus student, but we still had everything online. And so we took all the general education classes beforehand, so I wasn't too worried about missing those and being on Zoom. But we got to intro to sportscasting, and I was online, and I was like, man, I wish that I could be on campus. But we went through the whole thing, and I was like, well, this isn't too much different. You know, we have to still put together our rundown, and we still have to deliver what we're doing at the end of the month, and I'm still have to do it. It doesn't matter where I do it. Um, I've been around COVID long enough where it's kind of normal to me. So it was an interesting change. Uh, expecting to be in one of the most immersive programs I've ever seen at the college level to then being, doing exactly what we're doing now over Zoom. But I think it was a cool experience just to be able to see the building blocks of what the program was going to be like. Even through Zoom, I was super excited just to get everything going. So that even made me more excited to finally be on campus when the time came.
We're talking to Brandon Daniels. He works at Sushi Grade Media and has done an amazing job there. He's a field creator for them. He's also worked for Tennis Channel, which we'll talk about in a moment. But Brandon, eventually things got closer to back to normal, and eventually they did get back to normal for us on campus. And we started to open up opportunities to help and volunteer in the studio. And it got to the point that you were there so much that you got an award from Dan Patrick for having the most hours in the studio as you broke, I think at the time, a record for that. What made that time in the studio early in your career with us at Full Sail so valuable?
Well, first off, I wanted to see what the program was going to be like in classes that I was still a year away from getting to. That was the first thing for me. The second thing was I was so early on in the program, and I was doing everything I could outside of my classes to be able to, try to build my skills as much as possible in as much of a real world environment as I could. I had a podcast with one of my closest friends, Scott Kirk, and him and I were always talking about how we just want to do things. We can't wait to do things. So we did this podcast for a few months just to be able to do something. One of the credentials I have up here was the result of our work. We were able to go credential to a couple of Jaguars games, which was a super cool experience being so green in the industry to just kind of sit with a bunch of writers that I knew of. And, the last game I went to with Scott was a Jaguars Colts game. So I saw the writers that I, was reading about growing up and reading their work. So for us, it was super cool just to be in that professional environment. But at the same time, we were like, we want more. We want to do more. So when we were finally able to get in the studio, we're like, we have to go.
Welcome to the Hardcourt Hit Around. I'm Brandon Daniels.
screw the podcast. We're going to go in the studio and that's all we're going to do. So I got there because I just wanted to be immersed in everything that this industry has to offer because I was just so interested in it. It didn't matter to me what I was doing. I just wanted to be around the facilities that we had and just, making television was so cool to me that I just wanted to keep doing it.
Well, since you mentioned Scott Kirk, there's something I did want to bring up and over the course of this show today. So, because this involves both of you, I went golfing with some of the other course directors. You got Eric Rutledge, you've got Mike Stinton, you've got Gordy Hershiser, and we took this picture. And I found out later that a group of students that included Brandon had created their own version of the picture, which I'm going to pop up now. And as you can see, they kind of recreated what was going on there. I'm proud to say Brandon was representing me in this photo, but
I
Scott
was.
with the
I was.
Mike Stanton like dress code, Daniel Chiarelli with the Eric Rutledge same shirt, and then you got AJ back here. So tell me the story about how this photo recreation took place.
We were always playing golf on the weekends. Scott, AJ, DC, and I, we were always playing golf. And Eric Rutledge was somebody that we were in and around all the time just because he was at the time working in the studio before he transitioned to becoming the intro sportscasting teacher. So I saw him every day. We all saw him every day. And so we always started chopping up about golf and, oh, we played this course. I shot this much. I used to talk about it with Ruddy pretty much every week until he was like, dude, we got to stop doing this. Like, I don't really care about your 9 holes anymore and you don't care about mine. But we talked about it all the time. And Ruddy finally sent me that picture at Winter Park 9. He's like, hey, the guys are playing. And we were out playing. I think we were on the range one day, and Scott and I saw the picture. We're like, I think we have to recreate this. I think it would be hilarious if we recreated this picture. So we went out and played that weekend and we recreated the picture and it was just hilarious for us. It took us like 15 minutes to set it up. Everybody was like, what are these kids doing right now? But it was just funny. It was a little joke that we got to send over to you guys that we enjoyed.
Well, it made a big enough impact on me that I'm talking about it now. I thought it was like the funniest thing ever that you guys went to those lengths to do that. But you made some great friendships during your time there. And what was amazing about it was those were friendships that we saw work in conjunction to make great shows, that you were involved in so many different things with us. How did you enjoy working with the group to make some great television during your time as a student?
That was always something I loved the most. And if anybody asked me what was your favorite part about Full Sail, I always say that it was the people that I was able to work with and create with. One of my family members is now at Full Sail in the film program,
Hmm.
and he asked me, "What was your favorite part about Full Sail?" And I know we were in different programs, but he still asked me, and I said, "Well, I have such great friends that we were able to just create with, because we're all so like-minded. We all wanted to be in this industry. We wanted to create cool things, and we wanted to make an impact, whether that was just at school or it was whatever we did professionally." So being around that group of like-minded people was super cool because I had never really been around somebody who was so similar to me until I met Scott, and then I met AJ, and then I met DC, then I met KJ, and I met Alfonso, and I met everybody who's like, oh wow, these guys, they all think like me. And it's really cool because now we can go back into the conference room in the studio and we get to sit there and we get to create TV and talk about things we love, which at the end of the day, that's the best thing that we get to do in this industry, is that we get to talk and write and produce about things that we love, which is sports. So in the program, being able to be around people who I was so like-minded with and were some of my closest friends, just creating something that we enjoyed was really, really cool.
Much like the rest of those names you just mentioned, you got super involved and did a million things. It'd take me too long to list everything you did during your time with us, but how did you manage your time to fit it all in?
Uh, some of the intro to sportscasting kids, as I went through the program, asked me the same question, used to ask us the same question. And I said, well, look, if you really want to do what I want to do, you have to get 3 or 4 hours of sleep. So I don't suggest doing that, but I also quietly say that if you want to do as much as what a lot of my friends were doing and what I was doing, you kind of had to do that. You had to be able to take some, hey, I can't see a family for spring break, or I can't go up for this or this because I got to go because I want to go to this event and I want to go work here. And that still extends to, as a young professional, we have to do some of the same things. But in school, I was able to balance school with classes and then working at my job as an intern for Sushi Grade Media at the time, and then also trying to take in any of the extracurriculars that were offered by the program or through anybody I'd connected with. But for me, it was just about assigning blocks. So if I had a class 9 to 1, I knew that I was going to work from 1 to 6 or 1 to 7. And then after that, I was free to do whatever I wanted to do. I had to eat somewhere, obviously, and sleep at some point. But I knew that I just assigned myself blocks throughout the day for each day of the week. And so that was able to give me a really regimented idea of I have the most amount of time to do X event or work on this outside of school in this day of the week or anything like that. So I just regimented my time in blocks where I was able to really hone in on the times that I had to work on each thing.
Well, let's touch on two things because they both became jobs for you. So let's start with Tennis Channel. Share your experience being an intern there and how that developed into more for you.
Well, Tennis Channel, I was super excited about. Once I heard that there was even a sliver of something that was offered throughout the program, I was like, I got to figure out how I can get involved. And Ellie Davis, who was one of my closest friends while I was in school, she had the position with Tennis Channel. And what she'd do is she'd create a weekly report and it would go on social media. And so that was one of the positions that she held while she was, right after she finished school and the year after that she stayed. And so for me, I was always hearing about it because, I saw her with all my friends most of the time. So I heard, what she was doing and how she was doing it. And when she finally, left the job and she took a reporter position, an anchor position in North Carolina. She was like, "Hey, I got this friend who loves tennis. He should take this job." So I was able to just get the job through having a friend in Tennis Channel already, which was great. It was a very easy transition. But immediately, I knew that I wanted to do something a little bit different. Um, because I had spent so much time in the feature space, in the more produced side of television, that I wanted to use some of those skills that I learned throughout my internship at Sushi Grade Media while I was in college to be able to strengthen the position that was there with Tennis Channel. So we were always talking about how can we create produced content at the national campus in Orlando that we can post on socials or do whatever with throughout the year. So that was really what I spent most of my year working there doing was pitching them on concepts and hey, there's this coach here at the national campus. I'll do these, instructional videos with them. And then there's these juniors that are playing in the Junior US Open. Let's go do a piece on them because they're going to go to, New York City. They're going to go to Queens to play the US Open. So let's go do a piece on them. So I was just always pitching them on ideas. And it allowed me to really get my first taste of what being the kind of one-man band was because I had to shoot everything myself. I had to report on everything myself, obviously, and then I had to cut everything. So I learned quickly on how to be self-sufficient, and that has obviously helped me leaps and bounds now. But that year with Tennis Channel was a huge step for me as a professional because it was really my first time working professionally on that side of the camera, in front of the camera. So I really wanted to make sure that I got everything out of it that I could.
And that turned into a great job opportunity for you after you graduated as well. But so did Sushi Grade Media. That's where you spend all your time these days, at least for the most part. How did that get started for you to get a chance to intern there to begin?
That came out of the studio. It was one of the big benefits of working in the studio all the time was that Eric was sick of me being in there. And he's like, look, kid, you gotta like I can't pay you. So you gotta either leave or we gotta figure something out. And obviously he was joking, but I said to him, look, I wanna do as much as I can. I wanna get some more professional experience. Is there some sort of internship or something that I can do outside of the studio to really learn a lot about the industry? And we went through a couple of places, but then he finally said, hey, look, there's this job at this little office down the street. One of my colleagues from Golf Channel started it. It's this own little production company. I'll put your name in. And so I put my name in and I sent, what I had at the time, and it blossomed into an internship. It was the original position that I applied for was a creative associate or an associate producer, I guess, in more common terms. But I was still in school. I just wasn't ready for that. But my bosses now at Sushi Grade at the time, they're like, well, we have this 19-year-old kid who wants to work with us. He doesn't really have a lot of experience, but let's get him in the door and see what he could do. And so I was super excited to start there because I was like, hey, these guys want me to work there in any capacity, and I get some professional experience.
And that leads us to the next big question, because you're still working there and they're paying you
Mm.
money and they're sending you to some of the coolest places in the world. What's it like to live the dream right now for you?
It has been one of the best things ever. Living the dream for me is something that I always thought about. It's something that it was like when I got to Full Sail, being able to live my dream was something that I worked towards every single day. So to now be at a full-time position in this industry, whatever happens for the next however many years I spend in the sports industry, I hope for the rest of my career, and I intend it to be that way. Whatever happens, I know that I'm already living my dream by being in this industry, and because I worked hard for it. And so, and everything else that I accomplish in the rest of my career is just going to be an added bonus to that.
Well, you had a tough decision to make. I remember when you graduated, because you had the opportunity at Sushi Grade, but at least to start out, it was more on the production side, which you were obviously very well skilled at. But you also, during your time in our program, you realized you were pretty good on the air too. And you had some opportunities after graduation with local stations and things like that. So how did you make that decision to decide that Sushi Grade was the best place for you after you finished your work with us?
It was a tough decision. I'll say that first off. It was an extremely tough decision because I realized in the program that I wanted to be on air. And it was just like for all the things that I was doing so much behind the scenes, but this element of telling my own stories on the air just kept tugging me back. Like, you want to do this. Let's figure this out. Let's go do it. So finally, nearing graduation, I'm like, I'm going to apply. This is what I want to do. I want to start my career on air as a reporter, as an anchor, wherever it leads me. But I want to start my career doing that. And I was able to have a couple of interviews and a couple of offers. The big one that I had was working with one of my closest friends, KJ Doyle. So I had this opportunity not only to be on air talking about sports as an anchor and a reporter, but also working with one of my closest friends who, if I think back about everybody that I worked with throughout my time at Full Sail, there may not be anybody that I worked with better and had better continuity with than KJ. We just our minds thought the same. I think my best work in the program was with KJ next to me. So for me, I was like, wow, like I get to live my dream and I get to do it with one of my best friends. I have to take this. So I got the offer on a Friday and I said, hey, mom, dad, I got an offer. I'm going to take it. And they said, well, think about it throughout the weekend. I'm like, yeah, whatever. I'm going to take it, but I'll think about it. I'll tell you that I thought about it and then tell you on Monday that I'll take it. And I talked to KJ a little bit more. I talked to the other reporter that was also taking a position there. And we had our little group chat. It's probably still on my phone somewhere, buried from a couple of years ago. But we were talking about how excited we were to get started. And I was like, man, I went out with AJ and I was like, man, I don't know what to do. Like, I keep talking to KJ and I keep getting swayed over here, but for some reason, I won't take it. And he's like, well, you got to take the weekend to think about it. And I went and I talked to my dad again on Sunday, and he said, just consider all of the options. That's all he said. He should just consider all the options. And he wasn't going to tell me why. And I look back on it now, and he was completely right on why he was telling me this. But I walked in on Monday. My class was at 1 o'clock. So at 9 o'clock, because of the blocks that I set up, I was at Sushi Grade at 9 o'clock. That was the first thing I was doing Monday morning. So at 9 o'clock, I had to walk into the office, tell my boss at Sushi Grade that I wasn't taking his offer, and then go call the news director and tell him I was taking his offer, or vice versa. So it was all happening at this one point on a Monday. And I walked in on Monday saying that I was going to take the job in Texas to work with KJ and to be on air. And I walked in at 9 a.m. on Monday. I sat at my desk at Sushi Grade. I'm like, man, I got to wait for the boss to come in, and I don't want to talk to him how I'm not going to take this job because he's given me so much in the last year and I don't know what to do. And so he walked in and he just stops. He's getting like a sparkling water out of the fridge, and he just casually asked me, so what's up? What are you doing? And I turned around to him and I said, I'm taking the job here. And I was like, wait, did I say the right thing or what? So I was like, okay, so I'm staying here. And it was just such a spur of the moment decision, but it was the gut decision for me that I didn't even allow my brain to process that I had told myself I was going to take the job in Texas. I took the job in Orlando. And so now I need to call this news director and tell him I'm not going. And I called him and I said, hey, I really appreciate the offer. I really want to work with one of my best friends. I want to do what I love to do, but I'm going to stay in Orlando and continue working at the company I'm working at now. And we had a good conversation about it. And that was that. And I was like, wait, what did I just do? And I thought about it and I'm like, well, this was the decision I think I always wanted to take, but I was scared to take it because I just wanted to be on air. That's it. That's all I wanted to do was do that. But there was something dragging me back. And the reason I look back on it now was because everybody at Sushi Grade Media, at the time it was 6 people, now it's 14. Everybody wanted me to achieve my goals and live my dream. And they all kept telling me, you're going to get to where you want to go, but let us help you get there in a different way. And they kept telling me that. And they said, keep thinking about that while you think about this choice you're going to make. And that has always been at the back of my mind. And it still is because I'm now still here, a year and a half from that point, I'm still here. And I have never been more confident about that decision that I made because the trust they have in me, not only that they know that I'm going to be successful, but also I know they know what my goals are. They know what I want to do in this industry and they know where I want to get to. And they're going to get me there and they're going to help me build so many different facets of my toolbox or my game while I try to work towards my on-air goals.
Well, there's two things I want to touch on that you just said. Number one, I think it's always best to trust your gut. Do all the research, listen to everybody, think about it. But ultimately, that's generally going to be the right decision for you. Whether it works out or not, it's the way to go. And number two, there's so much to be said for having the right support system wherever you go. Now, for first jobs, it's a little less important because you got to get your foot in the door and all that. But in your case, you had multiple options. You took the one with a great support system, people who believed in you and who invested in you. And because of that, you have now gone to some of the coolest places. You've been to Augusta National working. I know you're going there again. You've been to Pebble Beach working and have played golf there. What have the travels alone been like for you?
Those are one of the perks of being at Sushi Grade Media. And I'm sure that was part of my gut decision, at least 1% of the way, was that I was just able to experience so many different things in this industry. I was able to see what the network level of television looked like. And I saw it every single month that I worked there, going to Pebble Beach, going to Augusta. The first big shoot that I worked on was going to Augusta. So I had worked on little shoots in and around Florida. And so I kind of understood what the process was, but it wasn't a ton more than what I did in Mark Condren's class when I did my PNP4 final, was doing a little feature. Not to discredit what we do at Sushi Grade Media, but I wasn't intimidated by that until I heard my first big shoot was going to be at Augusta National, and I was like, whoa, now something is real here. And but the last 2 years, 2.5 years now, being able to experience the industry at such a large level, being able to see some of the biggest golf tournaments in the world, how each part of the industry operates, how the features team operates, how the broadcast team operates. When I was first starting with the company, I was just really just two eyes trying to take everything in. So to go from there, that first year where I was just taking everything in helped me so much now, because now I'm in a position to lead people. Now I'm in a position to create things for those networks that I just was like, whoa, one day I want to do that, just like I was when I was 14. And now I went from being 14, watching this on my phone and on my computer, to seeing it with my own eyes for the first time, to now being in a position to create those things that I watched 10 years ago. And it was so many great things that I was able to do and in so many cool places. I can say that I've been to the big three in golf: Pebble Beach, Augusta National, and St. Andrews, all before I turned 22. So that was really cool. But it was those experiences that really shaped me, because again, it's all about adapting to your environment and operating at a level sometimes that's above the level that you have.
And it turns out you still were able to work with one of your closest friends, Nico Arsenagas, one of our former students, has joined you on the team. How have you enjoyed being part of this with him and to kind of share that experience together?
Nico, as much as we talk trash to each other, because that's pretty much half of our friendship at this point, what Nico did is he just gave me another level of enjoyment in what I was doing. He came in March of 2023, and that was at a point where I still didn't really know where I wanted to go next. I still wasn't, I had the job at Sushi Grade, and I was still content with the potential that they saw in me, and I was still in that support system that I trusted so much. But at the same time, I was getting a little antsy because I was like, well, I can't wait to do stuff. And at that point, working there, I had a couple of opportunities. I had done a good amount of interviews. I interviewed U.S. Open champions, and I interviewed these people and those people, but I was never really in a position to lead and create. And I think for me, that has always been something I loved, whether it be as a producer or as a reporter, which is, a huge part of reporting is being able to create things and tell stories. And I'd been around these stories for so long, I really just wanted to create them myself. And I was getting a little like, man, if this is going to happen soon, like, I think I got to leave. And it was the same sort of doubt that I had the year prior when I didn't know what I wanted to do in the industry and I didn't know what job I wanted to take. But when Nico got there, it really just spurred me to be like, all right, I want to be able to create something. I want to be able to have an important position in this company. Now he's here. He wants to do the same thing because we're both young, hungry members of this industry. This is really cool that we get to do this together. We get to lean on each other when we're feeling like, man, like we just worked 15 hours for no reason, or, we're not feeling like we're getting everything that we need, even though we totally are. Um, Having a support system for somebody who thinks like me in a company where everybody has worked 10, 20, 30 years. I was always the odd man out for somebody who didn't work at Golf Channel or who hadn't had all of these years of experience. And most importantly, who knew what they wanted to do in the industry, or who I was the one who didn't know and wasn't at the point that I wanted to be in the industry. And I was always the only one. And that was a little bit of a weird feeling because I'm operating with all these people who did know and who are doing what they love and who are doing what they dream of doing. So having a second person like Nico, who also was like, I can't wait to reach my peak. I can't wait to get to where I want to go. We were able to lean on each other. And that tandem has helped us leaps and bounds because now we're sitting here and there's going to be a few features that are going to go on Golf Channel in the next month or so that are going to be on the backs of my producing, my scripting, Nico's scripting, and our editing. So for us to see what we were able to do at a network level together has been super cool, and it has been just a result of the duo that we've kind of created as the young guys in the bullpen that we created at Sushi Grade. And so, yeah, Nico has been a huge part of what I do and how I've gotten leaps and bounds better because I have somebody who's, cheering me on right next to me, doing the dirty work just like me. So everything that I've achieved, he's been right there over the last year, and it's been really cool to have that.
That's so awesome. We're talking to Brandon Daniels. Brandon, we're going a little longer than we usually do, but I want to make sure we get to complete the story here. So if you don't mind, we'll go on just a little bit longer. I just want to touch on one more question about your job, which is kind of a double-barreled question. Sorry, Mike Tuck. But can you just share more about your responsibilities, like kind of what your day-to-day responsibilities are there, and in conjunction with that, how what you mentioned earlier about troubleshooting, how important that is, how that plays into it?
So my job, as we've mentioned a few times, is a field creator. So it is a little bit more and a little bit less than what a field producer does. I think the big thing that we touch on the company is that we do not take the union approach. We don't take the network approach. We are a team of people who are multifaceted, who can do a lot of different things. We have DPs who can color, and we have editors who can shoot, and we have everything else in between. So our approach is that every single person can do multiple things. So my job as a field creator is mostly as a field producer. So currently, the big project that I'm working on is lead producing a documentary for the Walker Cup, and that happened last September in St. Andrews. Again, really cool for me because I grew up watching these films, and now I'm lead producing one of them. It's my rundown, it's my script, it's my vision. That's really cool in and of itself. But there are, jobs as big as that and as small as, hey, we have this 2-minute feature piece that's going to go in, X video, and we're doing it for these people, and I produce those as well. So a lot of what I do is on the field producing side. But again, when we're out on shoots, I'm shooting cameras and I'm producing and I'm cutting and I'm DITing and like just I have so many different things in my toolkit. And I know that's something that we talk about a lot in the program, that my job title reflects that I'm a creator. I'm not just a producer. I'm not just an editor. I'm not just a shooter. I'm a creator. And that's something that I have in my LinkedIn bio as a creator because that's the most important thing to me.
Ask most teenagers, and chances are they don't have a life like Gianna Clement.
So having a job position that respects that and is true to that allows me to operate in so many different ways and with so many different aspects of this industry. So I think on the troubleshooting side, the biggest thing on the troubleshooting side is just I'm able to attack so many things in a different way. If I'm producing something out in the field, I know how an editor is going to think because I'm going to have to edit this at some point, or I know that one of my coworkers who I don't want to have to deal with my mistake is going to have to edit this. But I know because I know how to edit, and I know, and I have edited at a network level, or I've had edited piece for network, I understand some of the little things that need to be done. And the same thing goes on the other side. If I'm editing something, I know how I want it to be produced the next time. So troubleshooting for me has always been just a natural transition because there's so many different jobs that I do with the company that I can look at things in a lot of different ways.
All right, that leads us to our final big question. What are your future dreams within this business?
Well, I think the goal is still to be on air, and I think that's pretty big, and 30,000 foot view kind of thing. I think the industry is changing so much where the traditional anchor, reporter, producer, those positions are really the gray areas are really starting to become a lot bigger. And I think that's really cool to see because it speaks to what the position I have now is. A lot of what a field producer does is what a reporter does. So I'm taking all the right steps, I believe, to be able to get there because there are so many things that I'm still doing that a reporter does. And so for me, I want to be on air. I want to be a reporter. I want to be able to tell and create stories. So whatever medium or whatever position that leads me to, if I'm a reporter at a local and then a network station in my career, or it's going to streaming, or it's going to social, or it's going wherever. I think there's so many different ways that you can go now that me saying I want to be on air is so huge that it's hard to really put into words. But I think if I had to nail down my one big career goal, it would still be to be a reporter in any facet. So wherever that leads me to go, who knows? I've had so much change in my life that I'm open to whatever happens and wherever it takes me, but that's still my career goal at this point.
Sounds good to me. Well, we're not going to let you get out of here without what we call our dream sequence. I have 3 rapid fire answer questions for you, and just think of the first thing that comes to your mind, okay? All right. I know we've had this tennis and golf theme a little bit today, so I want to kind of finish with that. Dream golf foursome. Who would be the other 3 players you'd play with?
Phil Mickelson and Tiger have to be there. And then I think you got to put, I would put Arnold Palmer. I think I've never really heard a lot about Arnold Palmer. I've cut so much about him and I've written a lot about him, but I never really got to experience him as a player. But he's done so much for the game that I think I would want to really just be in and around 3 of the most, historical figures in the game. 2 in my generation, obviously 1 beforehand.
Got to go with the people's champ, right? Makes a mean iced tea lemonade as well.
Oh, yeah.
All right. Dream mixed doubles tennis match to cover. That means 1 man and 1 woman on each side of the net.
Rafael Nadal has got to be one. He's my favorite player. I'd love to see him team up with, I would love to see him team up with, I don't know, maybe Martina. I think Martina and Rafa, their games are so separate, but I think as a mixed doubles team, I think they'd really work well together. Rafa's an incredible baseliner. He's an incredible defensive player, but then Martina with her net game and her attack game, I think that would be a really cool mixed doubles team to look at. I think they'd be really successful, to put it that way. So if they do want to team up, wouldn't be opposed to being a part of it.
Great. Okay. And finally, what would the Brandon Daniels Masters Championship dinner consist of?
Champions dinner. That's really important. That's really important. I definitely go Asian inspired. It has always been my favorite cuisine, both before and after I went to China. And it was always something that I loved. So appetizer, first course, probably go with some sort of dumpling. And then if we're going 2 main courses, you got to go with some sort of noodle dish. And then at the same time, I'm half Italian, my family's Italian, and I can't go without some pasta with clams or some vongole, as we call it. So for me, those are the big two main course wise, and I can't go without a tiramisu to finish it off. So master's dinner, if you're invited, which Rishi, you definitely are, but anybody else who may be invited, that's what you're going to be getting.
I'm going to take you up on that. You're bringing me to Augusta, right? There we go.
Yeah.
All right. Before we wrap, any final advice you have for anybody watching, including our grads and current students?
One big piece of advice is always just keep working and keep dreaming. This industry is chock full of everything that we could have dreamed of as kids to be a part of. So to be part of it in any capacity, whether you're a student and you're getting your first taste of the industry, or you're already a professional and you're working towards something bigger. I think so many times we get inundated with our process. We get too hypercritical on ourselves, but at the end of the day, we're working in an industry that is a pleasure and a privilege to be a part of. So always keep that in back of mind, because we're doing something that a lot of people would dream to be doing. So keep that in the back of the mind when you're creating and when you're working to create, because that will always shine through, is your love and your passion for what you do.
That is the one and only Brandon Daniels. I want to thank him for his generous time that he offered with us today. I'm pretty sure, Brandon, this is the longest episode we have, so thanks for sticking it through, but so much to cover with you. And everybody watching, keep on living your own dream.